I don't actually like identifying as MBAs because I think most MBAs are tools, and I would actually appreciate it if you guys withhold judgment just at least till I get through this presentation, and then you can tweet away that I'm a tool and yeah, whatever. So I'm here to talk about branding, sort of the most abstract topic of probably MozCon, and I've got very little time to do it, so let's get started. So I'm going to start with a quote from Steve Jobs. It's a very noisy world. We have to be really clear what we want people to know about us. I really like this quote because it sort of describes what you're attempting to do when you're branding. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, great, who's this jerk who's starting with a Steve Jobs quote, right? Like, okay, I like Apple, but I actually think they're an interesting brand because Apple's, from the standpoint of the value of the brand, they have the most valuable brand in the world. And for the most part, love it or hate it, most people actually think Apple's brand is sort of, they think of it as being high quality, they think of it as being, most people like it. And so that's pretty incredible because when you actually look at Apple, you discover that they're actually the third largest corporation in the world by market cap. They're third only to China Oil and ExxonMobil. So they're the third largest corporation in the world. And so they're actually kind of a terrifyingly large behemoth. And yet their brand is sort of beloved. And so I think that's sort of an interesting thing that they've been able to do. But I'm actually more interested in small brands. So Trunkly is a good example of a kind of a startup that is doing great things with their brand. They're getting the same sort of adulation and respect for their brand, but they're doing it online. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So I want to go through some advice that I have that you should take with a grain of salt because branding is very, it's very subjective in how you talk about it. I have some techniques on how to do some things to increase your online brand and then how to measure it. So getting started, why does branding matter? Well, pretty simply, brands are recognizable. So who can tell me what that first brand is? Google, yeah. And the reason you know that is because you recognize the brand, and that's the power of building a brand that people recognize. What's the second one? Flickr, yep. What about the this one right here? Skype, yeah. And what's the last one? Dunkin' Donuts, yeah. And I love that because that was the kind of the curveball, and it actually makes me want to have a donut right now. Brands that get mentioned, brands get mentioned and recommended. So if you have a brand, you're going to get recommended. Dropbox. I mean, how many people discovered Dropbox through a friend? Dropbox is incredibly popular. Most of their growth has been through their brand and through recommendations. This is a very common tweet that you might find for Dropbox. And Dropbox effectively has replaced using USB keys, which it's fine, it works, but no one recommends USB keys. They recommend Dropbox because it's a brand. Brands establish quality. So I love this example of vodka. There's two bottles up here. There's Grey Goose and Popov. One's glass, one's plastic. One is $40, the other's $10. They both have different brands on the bottle. But you'd be surprised to learn that in some taste tests that I've seen, they're actually identical or that people did not have a discernible preference between the two. And so the only primary difference between these two brands, or these two bottles, is the brand. You're actually buying the brand of the other one. But fundamentally, they're made almost exactly the same way. And I'd much rather be in the Grey Goose business than the Popov business. Brands promote values. So when you think about brands, I love this quote from Bill Swalski from SEO by the Sea that he basically says that when you think of certain brands, there's certain values that you kind of perceive from that brand. And a great example is Zappos. Zappos is a brand that everyone just immediately thinks is great service, high touch, great customer service. And that's one thing that I think people will leave their Zappos box out because they have sort of an attraction to it. Brands have style. That's one thing that you see with Gilt Group, which is a 2-year-old brand that has, in that time, built a very stylish brand that is very popular. So I've given, well, one more, I guess. Brands have physical locations. So generally, people see that as a physical location. They're also licensed. They have a business license. They're registered with the Better Business Bureau. These are all things that lead to you doing better in search because we know that Google would prefer to see brands in search than non-brands. And so if you look at this search engine results page for shoes, you're going to see that most of these are brands. There's shoes.com as an exact match domain, but they're also a brand. So the reason that brands do better in search, there's a few up here, but because they generally result in better experiences for searchers. So that's why it's important for you to develop a brand. Either if you have a brand, you need to kind of develop it further, or you need to kind of look at your site and kind of think about how you will move forward with building a brand from it. So how do you define your brand? The first thing that I see is sort of the 4 key fundamentals of building a brand are these 4 things. And if we go through them individually, first is be unique. Have a unique name. So Groupon's a great name. It's a great brand. It's unique. You don't hear Groupon and think of some other company. You think of just that one company. You've got be descriptive. So Dropbox, another example. The brand sort of describes what it does. You put files in, they're stored there. That's really powerful. Be consistent. This is actually from our SEO Moz graphic designers. We have, this is in our brand guide of how not to use the SEO Moz logo. And this is really important. If you want to be recognized, if you want to kind of keep that quality of your brand, you gotta enforce it and you gotta be consistent. And most importantly, you gotta have great service and you gotta build a reputation. These things that are much more important than just your brand. The example that I love to use is Friendster. If anyone's old enough to remember Friendster, Friendster was actually a great social network. It was very useful. In fact, it reminds me a lot of what Facebook was just a few years ago. The problem was they couldn't keep their servers up. So nobody could log in, nobody could post images, nobody could comment. And so their brand just got destroyed and just suffered, and people made fun of it constantly. And so MySpace came in and just completely just obliterated their customer base. Another example that needs no explanation is a brand that was just completely destroyed by their reputation. So that's really important that first and foremost you treat giving good customer service, building a good brand, building a good reputation for your business. As far as design is concerned, I think it's okay to be typical but not boring. So what do I mean by that? Well, so one thing that is sort of tightly kerned Helvetica bold, if you guys are familiar with this, it's like it's the hipster neck scarf of branding. It is like there are more brands that use Helvetica bold than anything else. In fact, here's just like 6 of like 1,000. So there's American Airlines, Crate and Barrel, there's Toyota and Target, there's American Apparel, there's SEO Moz is also using it. So these are actually typical, and this is fine. They're not that boring, and that's kind of what's important, is that you can be typical, but just don't be boring. Be clever. Have you guys seen in FedEx logo the arrow between the E and the X in the white space? I think that's just like one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a logo. And now that I've told you, every time you see a FedEx truck go by, you're going to see that arrow. So one thing that I recommend companies do is if their brand is not where they want to be from a design standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, is that you work to refine it over time so you can get where you want to be and you avoid sort of that brand backlash if you rebrand. And so examples, I think Starbucks has actually done an awesome job of going from slowly progressing their brand to the most recent brand that they have is the one in the front cup. People were a little apprehensive at first, but frankly, it's just, we all immediately recognized it. And they're sort of at that point where Nike is, where they just don't need the letters anymore. They just need the brand. Some examples of brands that didn't do a good job rebranding. Gap is a perfect example of a boring rebrand, right? Like we all recognize the logo on the left, but the one on the right is just plain old boring Helvetica bold with just a box. Like they didn't do anything creative with it. And so that's an example of where they could have probably over the next few years slowly iterated into that rebrand and not have it been such a shock. Another example of a brand that you might remember that completely failed was the Tropicana rebrand. The one on the left actually looks like orange juice. The one on the right looks like sunscreen. Like it's really weird. It completely bombed and completely failed. So it's really important that you take those iterative steps. SEO Moz, that's our original logo. I think about, 3 or 4 years ago, we were using the one in the middle. And then about 2 years ago, we switched to the one in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's kind of been a slow iterative process. No one was shocked when the logo in the bottom right-hand corner came out. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but it's really important to know your customer. So Budweiser did this drinkability campaign, and they ran millions of TV advertising. They put billboards everywhere. They had no idea who their customer was. Their customer is guys, right? And guys don't care about how drinkable a beer is. They care about partying and I don't know, bikinis and beach parties and whatever. So drinkability was basically saying, for their brand, it was basically saying, oh, that sissy drink you drink, yeah, it's really easy to drink because you can't handle anything, right? And so it was this completely failed campaign. They just completely bombed. And the agency, they spent $100 million on this campaign. And if anyone with common sense had looked, they would have known that this is just not going to work with this core demographic. So they've since recovered from that. So it's also important to note that a brand can be much more than a logo. Some examples that I love are MailChimp. They use Freddy, which is their mascot. SEO Moz has Roger, which we love to use in our branding. And then there's Salesforce.com, which actually has this weird button that sort of represents their revulsion to software. They think that software is dead and that you should use the cloud. It's actually a very, very powerful branding thing. And then whenever the CEO goes around, he's wearing a button. He's wearing this button. He's been wearing it for 10 years. So getting inspired, and as far as building your brand, one of my favorite sites is Dribbble. That's 3 Bs. It's an awesome site where graphic designers just post things that they're working on. It's sort of the Twitter for graphic designers. I love it. So I want to quickly go through 10 ways, pretty quickly, that you can sort of establish your brand. We've talked about what goes into a brand. Now let's talk about some actionable techniques. So first off, get the right domains. Trunkly, great example. Trunkly has 2 domains. They have trunk.ly and they have trunkly.com. And they did that because if I say Trunkly to you, the first thing you're going to think is, how do I get there, right? You might Google it. But you're probably going to try one of those 2 domains. Because they own both, they can redirect one to the other, and they're getting as much traffic as they like. Those are 2 sites, Domize and NX Domain, that are really great for searching for secondary domains, searching for short URLs, things like that. Second, claim and manage all of your online presences. For those of you not familiar with Noam, I love it. It allows you to kind of see if your brand name is available at all of those sites. Very, very useful tool. Third, establish your location and be consistent with the profile data. So David Mims get listed is awesome. If you have a physical business location, you need to get listed on all these sites. And most importantly, when I mean be consistent, make sure you enter the exact same brand name in every single profile. This is one thing that Google uses to link together a Yelp profile to a Google Places profile to a Better Business Bureau listing. This helps them establish the value of your brand. So make sure all the data is exactly the same way in each profile. 4, own the branded SERP. So own your brand name on the search engine. So this is the SEO Moz branded SERP. Cyrus and the SEO Moz team have done a lot of work to make this, that we just sort of dominate the first 10 results. We have a great site links first listing. We have our blog, our tools. We have the beginner's guide to SEO. It's great. Now here's an example of a brand. I hope no one here is from Linksys. But this one is crazy. This one has a pay-per-click listing. It has linksys.com with no meta description. It has a Cisco URL, a home support URL, a linksysbycisco.com URL, and then a UK URL. So there's actually 5 different domains here for Linksys. And as a user, I don't know which one is the canonical version. So spend some time looking at this. It's really important to kind of manage your branded SERP. A lot of folks ask if they should buy your brand name in AdWords. And there's 2 reasons that I recommend that you do this. One is if a competitor is bidding on your brand name. So if you look at this example, this is the Rhapsody music service. You can see Napster is actually bidding on this keyword. You can try and go to the Google trademark team and get them to take it down. I've never had much luck. But if you bid for your keyword, because you're going to have a higher quality score for your domain, you're always going to push them to the right side. So it's sort of a defensive strategy, but if you've got someone who's bidding on your keyword, your brand keyword, that's one reason. The second would be is if you want to have your AdWords listing go to a different destination. So it's usually that the first organic link is going to go to your homepage. If you want this first one from AdWords to go to a landing page, that would be another reason to buy the keyword. And they're usually, in my experience, about, 10 to 20 cents a click, usually. Leverage social features on your site. So this is putting the social buttons. This is going to get your brand out through those social networks. This is using Facebook comments, potentially. One thing I love about Facebook comments is that when you leave a comment on a site that has Facebook comments, like TechCrunch, it goes on your Facebook wall. When your friends come to TechCrunch, they actually see your comments at the top, And it's this incredible reciprocal way of getting additional traffic and comments on your website. Third is something that I believe we're going to be talking a little bit more about tomorrow, but Facebook Facepile. This is the faces on your website. This is great for conversion, but it's also great for getting more people to your site. When someone adds or likes you, this appears in their wall. It shows up on the site. So another great way to leverage brand on your site. Number 6 is monitor your mentions and engage. So today we have to rely on Google AdWords. SEO Moz has an alpha tool called Blogscape, which is also very useful. It's something that we're working to improve so that we can do something better than Google AdWords. But effectively, if someone mentions your brand on Quora, for example, you should go there immediately and jump into the conversation. This is how you're going to be seen as someone who's responsive, that you've got a great brand, and that you're worth engaging with. 7 is to leverage retargeting. This is a great way to bring first-time visitors or someone who's only been to your site once, get them back to your site. This is an actual example of retargeting that we ran on a tweet pic, and I love this screenshot because of that baby. 8, consider doing brand display and media buys. So this is an example of one that SEO Moz did on Search Engine Land. Now this is one thing I'm recommending that costs money. And this is something that is generally pretty expensive. So I would sort of consider this if you're really just getting started out and you've got between a 5 and 20K budget per month to potentially do this. But what I recommend, as opposed to going blind on the Google Display Network or the Yahoo Display Network, is target sites. So most of us know where our customers hang out, what blogs they read, what news sites they go to. Target those sites and just do a test. Run maybe 100,000 impressions on that site and just see how it performs. A company that does an awesome job of this that we all see over the web is MailChimp. And what they do is they just put their logo and they put the chimp. That's it. There's no message. There's no offer. It's just the brand. And it's something that they primarily do just to build awareness of their brand. Participate in events. I think this is sort of a no-brainer, but if you can't afford to throw an event, go to an event, show up, engage with people. And finally, delight your customers. And this is a photograph that I think is just my representation of the SEO Moz staff trying to delight. I guess we're delighting ourselves and not really delighting our customers, but I think it gets the point across. So just to wrap up, I've got 5 ways that I recommend folks use to measure your brand awareness online. These are free techniques. So if you hire a big expensive PR firm, they're going to use a very expensive brand monitoring package. And I don't find it to be very useful. I actually find these 5 free techniques to be incredibly useful on figuring out how much growth you're getting in your brand name. So number 1, this is one that I am I'm fervent about. So break out your SEO reporting between branded keywords and non-branded keywords. You'll find that if you look at conversions, they perform very differently. So you'll notice that we have 3 times the conversions on branded keywords than we do on non-branded. So for about, the conversion rate is just like 5x for branded. And so you should know that, and you should measure it differently, and you should measure the visits differently. These are people who are searching for your brand name. So the way that you do this is in Google Analytics, you create an advanced segment, and this is the screenshot. We'll upload this deck. But basically, you just add keywords as part of the advanced segment. You add your brand name. So for us, it's SEO Moz, SEO space Moz, and then we occasionally put in a typo because it's something that people do search for quite a bit. And then what you do is you apply that advanced segment to the search reports and the conversion reports, and you can get to see how much of your traffic and your conversions are a result of branded keywords versus non-branded keywords. Secondly, use Topsy. Topsy is an awesome tool to kind of measure your the mentions online in both the social web as well as Twitter. This search query is really great. You'll notice that it says -RT and -via. So this is ignoring retweets and via mentions in Twitter. But my favorite thing about Topsy, raw numbers. If you look in the left column there, it shows you how many, in the last 7 days, the number of web social mentions. It tells you how many tweets you had in the last 7 days, 30 days, and all time. So pull that every single week. Just pull the number of tweets you had last week, the last 7 days, and record that over time, and you'll get to see if you're seeing growth in your tweet mentions. 3, use Google Analytics direct traffic. So this is people directly coming to your website by typing in your brand name. This is really interesting to see over time and see if there's growth there. If you have a big branding ad spend for a particular month, you should be seeing this go up, and you should be seeing your branded searches go up. So this is something that I recommend folks look at every week. Use Facebook Insights. So if you have a Facebook fan page, and I think we're going to talk about, Alex will probably from Facebook, will talk more about this tomorrow. The data that is on Facebook Insights is incredible. It tells you the demographics of the people who are visiting your Facebook page, visiting your particular website, if you have Facebook's tracking code installed in your site. But it also provides this very useful number that it's called interactions. And this is both how many people have interacted with you by liking or commenting or clicking through. And then there's also this post views, which basically shows you what reach did your content have on Facebook. And this is like if you share something on Facebook and that goes out to your 100 friends, this allows you to see how many people that reached total. So very useful. Lastly, count your followers, your Facebook likes, and your RSS subscriptions. And the way that I like to tie all this together is create a Google Doc where you have all those metrics on the column, or in a column, and then every week, just enter the numbers in. And after 6 months, maybe you'll shoot me an email, maybe you won't. Maybe you're like, this took way too much time. But the goal is effectively that you're going to see where you're succeeding, where you're not. Because just looking at a snapshot, like where I am today, it's useful. But looking at your growth over a 6-month period, that's where you start to see where you're having success, where you're not, and where you can make more investments. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up by saying that you really don't need an online brand to succeed. There's plenty of exact match domain names that are doing good in SEO and getting sales, but I honestly think it's something that everyone should do if they really want to succeed online. So thank you.